From 1901 to 1909, Theodore Roosevelt served as the 26th President of the United States, and in 1908, he chose William Howard Taft as his hand-picked successor, and he left the fate of the country in William Howard Taft's hands. But in 1912, the end of Taft's first term, Roosevelt became disgruntled with the way the country had been run and decided to throw his hat in the ring. At first, Roosevelt decided to run for the Republican Party nomination, but soon realized the party bosses were too strong to defeat, as they would select William Howard Taft, the incumbent president, as the Republican Party nomination. As a result, Theodore Roosevelt and many of his constituents broke off from the Republican Party and spearheaded a new campaign as a Progressive Party candidate. The two other candidates for the 1912 election were Eugene V. Debs, running from the Socialist Party, and Woodrow Wilson, seeking the Democratic Party nomination. Since so many people were disgruntled with the way Taft had run the country, Theodore Roosevelt's main concern during the 1912 presidential campaign was Woodrow Wilson, because he was running as a progressive Democrat, though his plans were not as progressive as Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt spent much of his campaign traveling the country and giving speeches about many of the issues facing the country, such as dismantling the trusts and women's suffrage. One of Roosevelt's most significant speeches was the one he gave on November 2nd, 1912, regarding Woodrow Wilson and the trusts. In this speech, Roosevelt points out Wilson's hypocrisy with regard to Wilson's New Freedom Plan. In his New Freedom Plan, Wilson advocated for business regulation by the state, whereas Theodore Roosevelt and his New Nationalism Plan advocated for business regulation through government programs. But as Roosevelt pointed out in his speech, while Wilson was governor of New Jersey, he allowed many trusts, like Standard Oil, tobacco, steel, and beef, to get charters and operate in his state. Roosevelt argues that if trusts were regulated at a national level, they would not be allowed to monopolize one state or another. Roosevelt gave a speech 2 months before about another controversial topic during the 1912 election, that is, making women's suffrage a federal amendment. On September 9th, 1912, Roosevelt went to Washington State to speak to a group of women about the importance of voting. Since women had been given the right to vote on a state level, specifically in western states, Roosevelt felt it was important to band them together to vote for him, as he was the only candidate advocating women's suffrage. In his speech, he said, "The suffrage having been given to you, it is not only your right, but your duty to exercise it. You are false to your duty as citizens and women if you fail to register to vote." By giving this speech, Roosevelt certainly did spur a lot of women to the polls on Election Day. And in Washington State, where he gave the speech, he defeated Woodrow Wilson by about 28,000 votes. Certainly a show of confidence from the women to whom he gave that speech. In the end, Woodrow Wilson did win the office of the presidency, with 41.8% of the popular vote and 435 electoral votes. Theodore Roosevelt's campaign was certainly not one to be ashamed of, as he won 27.4% of the popular vote and 88 electoral votes, the biggest vote for a third-party candidate in presidential history. By running as the Progressive Party candidate against the status quo, that was William Howard Taft, he made sure that a new way of thinking would usher into the office of the presidency through Woodrow Wilson. As he said in his concession speech, "As for the progressive cause, I can only repeat what I have already for many times said. The fate of the leader for the time being is of little consequence, but the cause itself must in end triumph, for its triumph is essential to the well-being of the American people." Roosevelt made sure through his campaign that even if he would not become president, his ideas would carry through the presidency for generations, as they did. In Woodrow Wilson's term, women got the right to vote through the 19th Amendment, and during the presidency of his fifth cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, many of his ideas in New Nationalism were put in place through government-regulated programs to help the people, like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that have stood for generations.